Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Kevin Bushweller, Chris Curran, Constance Steinkuehler, Jesse Schell, and Alan Gershenfeld.
Hello, good morning and good afternoon to all of you. Really glad to be here. My name is Kevin Bushweller. I'm an assistant managing editor at Education Week. I oversee our coverage of educational technology and industry and innovation issues, which is basically the K-12 marketplace. I want to start by I want to make it clear that I am not an expert on the complex twists and turns of digital games. That knowledge and those skills come from the top-notch panelists we have here today, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion we're going to have. But I am a keen observer of the trends that are reshaping the K-12 landscape, and it is safe to say that the use of digital tools for teaching and learning is leading schools in new directions like never before. Personalized learning, a concept that was more of a vague vision than an observable reality just a few years ago, is now emerging in regular public schools across the country, driven largely by the power of digital tools and more creative teaching approaches. If you haven't read it yet, you should read an issue of Technology Counts on edweek.org because we covered those issues in that report. Digital games, more and more, are seen not simply as a nice add-on to the school day if time permits, but rather as integral to a new way of learning that embraces intellectual feedback and collaboration at levels that did not exist in schools in the past. Games could be one of the most transformative tools for bridging instruction and assessment, a goal that has eluded most schools up to this point. Now, we are following these trends at Education Week by examining them critically, honestly, and with the goal of giving educators and digital curriculum developers the feedback they need to make their teaching approaches and products and services better and more relevant and useful. Our coverage of these issues has included articles, news and opinion blog posts, video stories, audio interviews, webinars, online chats, and other approaches. As we tackle the topic of turning fantasy into reality here today, I want you, the audience, to think critically about your own approaches and products and services. What has worked, what has not, and why? The title of this session actually came from my observations at Games for Change 2013. I attended a number of sessions here last year, and while I was impressed by the passion and technological know-how of many of the startups promoting their games, the same questions kept popping into my head. Have these people spent any meaningful time in a typical public school of today? Do they really understand the barriers and complexities of the K-12 marketplace? Are they living in a fantasy world? Now, I have 4 kids. The oldest is a junior in college, and the youngest is in 5th grade. And their experiences help me stay grounded in the real world of schools. The 5th grader has used digital games extensively over the past 2 to 3 years, especially for math. She has gone from hating math with a passion to now attacking it in an analytical, creative, and persistent way. And I'll be honest, I attribute that largely to the strong link between instruction and assessment featured in the learning game she has used. And she actually sees that connection too. Now, that idea of moving from fantasy to reality is what we're here to talk about today, and I encourage you to join the conversation. Please raise your hand at any time. We're not going to have an official Q&A session in the last 10 minutes. If you have a question and you'd like to ask it at the moment we're discussing something, please raise your hand. But please get to the point quickly because we have a lot of ground to cover in this hour. Now, I am very pleased to introduce our excellent panel today, beginning with Alan Gershenfeld, right to my left. He is the founder and president of Eline Media, a publisher of digital media that aims to educate and empower people. Alan, who many of you have seen during the course of the last few days here, has spent the past 20 years working at the intersection of entertainment, technology, and social entrepreneurship. On his left is Jesse Schell, who is an add to our conference. He's not on that list there because we brought him in at the last minute, and so we really appreciate him joining this discussion. Jesse is a video game designer, author, CEO of Shell Games, an educational game studio in Pittsburgh, and a distinguished professor of entertainment technology at Carnegie Mellon University. To his left is Constance Steinkuehler, who is an associate professor in digital media at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and co-director of the Games plus Learning plus Society Center at the Wisconsin Institute of Discovery. Her research is on cognition and learning in commercial entertainment games and games designed for impact. On her left, and last but not least, is Chris Curran, who is the founder of Education Growth Advisors, which advises and invests in education companies. Now, what I'd like to do to get us all thinking is I want to start with a short video produced by Education Week that was part of a special package we published last August titled "Researchers See Video Games as Testing Learning Tools." Let's have a look at that video.
Video games are something that the current generation of kids is growing up with. And our view is if kids are using these kinds of devices for better or for worse, and if we can substitute some of the content that they are engaging with, we can potentially make a positive difference.
Given that games are what you might consider highly engaging as a medium, the question is, could you create a video game that is fun and compelling to play? Could you create a game that basically teaches kindness? Could you create a game that that actually strengthens pro-social skills?
How bad do you have to
The skills we're going after underlie not just schoolwork, but work performance, underlie, family satisfaction, underlie whether or not you report overall happiness in your every single day. And that's fairly profound. I mean, that's when I think you start getting into why build games just to improve grade points? Why not build games that actually save people, save the world? So Crystals of Khador is an RPG or a role-playing game where you are essentially in this alien territory. You're a robot. You're out in space. You have a shuttle problem with your spaceship, and you crash land on a planet. Your task is to find your missing parts that have now been spread everywhere in this alien territory. And there's an alien population there. In order for you to put yourself back together, you have to interact with the aliens and get their help. So your biggest challenge is to figure out how do you enlist the aliens in helping you when you have no language to do it in, and all you have is emotional gestures. You have to be able to recognize what emotional display is on their face, and then you have to figure out how to respond productively. So, for example, can you recognize the difference between frustration and anger? And then practicing choosing responses to that reduce problems and tension rather than escalate them. You think that that's very simple, but it turns out that it's not a simple activity, and it's not simple even for adults.
Neuroplasticity refers simply to the fact that the brain is the organ that changes in response to experience and in response to training. we know something about the circuits that are important for attention and the circuits that are important for empathy and pro-social behavior. And the conjecture is that the games are going to strengthen those circuits. We have ways of measuring that directly using functional brain imaging. And we are using the state-of-the-art neuroscience to actually assess what the games are doing to the brain. I think that if we find positive results, I think it would be a kind of proof of concept that that this stuff is real, that we really can change these things in a relatively short amount of time, and that the possibilities are really significant.
Okay, so let's get this discussion started. I'd like to start with a question to all the panelists, which is a fairly straightforward question. What are the biggest mistakes game developers make when trying to create learning games for the K-12 market, and how can they avoid making those mistakes? Jesse, you had a reaction to that?
Well, there's a lot of mistakes, so it's hard to kind of pick where to begin, because there's so many.
Mm-hmm. I think
I would say probably the biggest one, I guess the one I see the most, is people who are incredibly enthusiastic. They have a concept for a game that solves a particular educational problem that they're very passionate about, and that there is often a misconception about the challenges of actually getting it to schools. There's a lot of people who go in with the notion that, well, all I need is, this is such obviously a good idea that I'll just get a grant, and the grant will get it made, and it will get distributed and integrated to the schools, when really there are so many complexities and layers in marketplaces that there can be a lot of challenges to that.
Okay, Alan, we talked about this yesterday, actually, at quite a bit of length out in the hallway. What's your perspective on that?
I think there's an incredible lack of rigor in terms of understanding whether a game or a game-based solution is replacing time or money in the classroom. And to do that takes a lot of research in whatever subject level, whatever age level. What's currently there? Because essentially one is proposing that something is going to be replaced. And we, as a publisher, we look at a lot of grant, philanthropic funded games. Often they are bounded games that may have a great alignment of, because it's getting more sophisticated, the alignment of gameplay and learning science, and that's necessary but not sufficient, because if it's covering a half day of a year curriculum and you spend $1 million and it's complex to implement, it's going to be a marginalized supplemental offering. So I think some of this is nomenclature. Are we talking about bounded games that one plays and finishes? Are we talking about game-infused services that provide a structure for how a game works? If it's a service solution versus a product solution, how is it sustained beyond the grant? And to me, the big question is, can game-infused learning be the dog and not the tail? With all the dislocation that's happening, there's incredible opportunity, but it's a little bit of a different mindset in terms of the research that has to happen, in terms of the market that it's going into.
Mm-hmm. Constance, as far as how the games are developed and looking at the complexities of K-12 schools, curriculum demands, time demands, what needs to change to make sure that what people here are trying to develop succeed at a higher level?
Well, if we're going to, I'm assuming we're narrowly talking about K-12 classrooms, probably public school, which I just want to point out is not the market for all educational games by a long shot. Mm-hmm. But let's just presume that, which means basically you're probably needing to tie to Common Core. One novel but useful piece of advice is to perhaps engage a teacher in the process early on. Oftentimes I find that Larry Kubin's early work on computers in classrooms still somehow is amazingly true, where technology really doesn't get taken up in many classrooms because it's a solution looking for a problem that no one ever had. So making sure that the game, the actual goals, which I think is things you guys have already touched on, making sure that it actually is something that is useful and a problem the teacher actually wants to solve, whether it's a conceptual understanding, whether it's getting somewhere faster, easier, deeper, but connecting it to the classrooms that already exist.
The phrase we often use is, don't build a complex non-solution to a simple non-problem, right?
Well done.
Chris, we talked about this earlier too, as far if you can address more of the marketplace,
Yes, as an investor, I think there's a question that's not often asked, and it's been touched upon by everybody here, but if you can't fundamentally alter the efficiency of a teacher's life, and starting with the teacher as the tip of the spear for implementation of any learning solution, you're dead on arrival. And if you can't demonstrate an ability to provide that efficiency amongst a host of things they have to check the box on daily as an educator, it's going to be very difficult to get it into the classroom at all, or if it's there by design through a grant, it may never be picked up and deployed. And then the flip side of that coin is also just fighting for scarce resources. You have dramatic decline in the amount of textbook revenue that's been generated in the basals over the last 5 years, but you've had a transition to assessment and other supplemental curriculums, and how do you interoperate games alongside of those dollars, which are always limited. So those are the two business laws: teacher enablement and the bucks, how you're funding it.
Okay. It seems like, though, this is a moment in time where there's a lot that's coalescing. The use of digital curricula, like I mentioned earlier, the push toward more personalized learning, and more flexible approaches to education. What do developers need to do to make sure that they seize that moment? Because this could be a moment where if it's not seized, it'll pass. And what has to happen to make sure that sort of intersection takes place?
I actually believe this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity. The next 4 to 5 years, 5 to 6 years, is astounding. A number of things are happening. The textbooks are going away. Curriculum is becoming unbundled. Nobody is clear how curriculum will become rebundled and by who. And there's not one answer, but it's a dramatic change. Technology is now in the classroom, and it's going to be there. It's fragmented. You'll have iOS and Android devices. You'll have computer labs, and that fragmentation is going to continue. You have the assessments changing. The Common Core, the Next Gen Science Standards, and analogs all over the world are a little bit more about higher order skills, process skills, a lot of press about a disconnect between what employers need, what people need to thrive and be successful in what we're teaching. These are an astounding set of dislocation and change that's happening in schools. The pain points are enormous. Personally, I believe, in general, when you look at the new assessments, you look at the new standards, you look at what employers want, you look at what people really need to thrive, they tend to line well with things like inquiry-based learning, blended learning. You hear these buzzwords, but they're real. This is the type of learning. But the fact is, it's really hard to design, develop, implement, and support those type of learnings. I believe the people who can do that are going to experience enormous success. I don't think it's a demand problem. I think it's a supply problem. And I don't think it's one group that's going to do it. I think there are going to be systems that are flexible, modular, and extensible, but have learning science and spines behind it. And instead of a bunch of small bounded games, I think the community here has the ability to address this enormous challenge, but I don't think it's currently doing it.
Jesse, do you believe that it is that moment in time too, or are you a little skeptical about that?
I believe this is a really important moment in time right now, and I think you put it perfectly. The fragmentation is incredible, and something new is going to grow out of this, and we don't know what it is. And I think we need to all accept that we don't know what it is. I guess the way I look at it is, I think the keys to success are to keep an open mind about where it could go, because no one's can be sure right now. And if you keep an eye on where all the pieces are moving and how things are going to start to congeal, and at the same time you devote yourself to creating great work, then when the opportunity comes and you see it and you say, there it is and it's forming, if you're in a position where you have a portfolio of great work and you have learned lessons and you now have the skills, the abilities, the team to be able to seize that opportunity, that's going to be very important.
Did you want to add to that, Constance?
I was just thinking, the part that I get really excited about is that assessments are getting dragged along into the future by digital media. So you can see me being the data research nerd on this topic, but there's some real openings right now around games as content vehicles, of course, right? So yes, there are games that are ostensibly about math, et cetera, but that you can actually look at other second-order variables within those interactions, so that you're looking at things like persistence, tenacity, grit, problem solving, systems reasoning, et cetera, which are valued by teachers and are valued by families and are valued by voters and workplaces. So part of what's happening that's really exciting in games for learning is that you're starting to create not just really amazing and compelling and engaging interactions with ideas in a particular domain, but we're starting to figure out how to iterate forward on how we might measure that in really deep ways. You know, no teacher or policymaker sat out saying that, you know, multiple choice tests or those kinds of assessments that we traditionally do were the ideal assessment. We did it because we could, and because it was scalable, and because we could keep it systematic across students. Well, now digital media are ushering in a whole nother generation for learning scientists, because now we can start to think about digital platforms as that new kind of assessment vehicle in classrooms.
So do you, with the idea of using games to teach skills like persistence and grit and that sort of thing, and that's what that was about a bit, do you, with all the demands of Common Core coming and all the demands of sort of, you know, math curricula and social studies and English, how do you think you're going to get schools to buy into the idea that that is going to help make, you know, education better at our school? That's why we need to do it, even though it's not aligned to actual academic subjects.
I actually think it's better aligned than people think. I mean, again, if you really deconstruct the Common Core and the next-gen science standards and the analogs coming up, they're remarkably well aligned. I mean, the work we're doing at ASU with the Center for Games and Impact there is we kind of cluster the this is a lot of John Seely Brown's work. The cultivating of dispositions, we believe, is really important, and they really are cultivated across subjects and across age. The mentoring of literacies and skills also don't happen in one snapshot. They happen across subject and across age. But you have to do that in the context of covering the domain content and knowledge, which is different in different cities, different states, different regions. And solutions, again, it doesn't have to be one provider, but solutions have to think about all of that. And then there will be third-party benchmark assessments that will evolve and change. But fundamentally, if you're not thinking holistically about that, then you have to really figure out, what piece am I doing? And what goes before or after me, and what is the context I'm sitting in? And if you don't, I mean, it's funny that the dispositions and skills that we want in our kids, we need as practitioners. You got to be engaged and purposeful. You got to be a disciplined investigator. You got to solve problems. You got to do it collaboratively. We need those skills to foster those in our youth.
Maybe we should play those games.
We got to build them so we can play them, so we can do them, so we can put them out there.
Well, what types of games or approaches have you seen that have made them, you know, seen the most success in K-12 schools, but also outside K-12 schools? Because you mentioned that, you know, that Chris, we talked about after-school programs, that there's other arenas other than your typical classroom that are connected to the K-12 system. What types of digital games and other approaches have had the most success?
Well, coming back to the theme of assessment and also my original statement about solving problems for teachers, there's been a huge transition of dollars from summative, high-stakes end-of-year exams to formative assessment, and the child, the evolutionary child of formative assessment is adaptive assessment platforms. We did a white paper last year for Gates Foundation where we looked at 75 different emerging companies that we'd never heard of prior to doing the work, and you're able to provide something in the classroom that can provide some automaticity when you break into small group instruction. If you're able to check the box on those Common Core elements that you're trying to cover, you're trying to provide a means to measure and show improvements in learning outcomes with a subset of the classroom while you're tending to other things as the teacher or instructor in the class, then you're accommodating a lot of things. That ability to try and do what you need to do in the course of the day as an instructor, you're measuring and showing advancement in a new form of evolving assessment, and you're keeping kids engaged in the learning process, maybe in a subgroup in the class. So I think there's a lot of excitement around assessment broadly, but also what's happening with adaptive assessment. There's an embarrassment of riches of new platforms and programs that are entering the marketplace, and it's a lot of those are game-based or have game elements to them. So that's one of the more exciting places that I'm focused on.
And we were talking, you mentioned it earlier, Common Core. How much do you think that is actually going to open new doors for this kind of learning, as opposed to the way it was before? Is that going to open a lot of doors because of how it's framed, Jesse?
Yeah, I definitely think that it is going to open some doors for a number of reasons. First of all, it puts schools in a mindset of, oh, we need to do this in a new way, because that's just the nature of it. It's new. You have to do it in a new way. And so they're looking for a new solution, and so that's good. Secondly, the whole nature of Common Core is that it is common, and one of the reasons I think that there was a desire for this was that it does open up the educational marketplace a bit, because when there are 50 states with 50 standards, how are three guys in a garage going to make a product for that? They're going to be really challenged. But when the marketplace, suddenly three guys in a garage can make something that hits all of the states, that is suddenly opens up choices in the marketplace.
I also think the folks that really get deep penetration aren't going to provide a black box solution. Like, I don't think this can be solved by an algorithm. I think the adaptive systems are part of the process, but ultimately I think these products and services, and increasingly I believe they're going to be services, are going to be adapted, not just adopted. So having the tools and technologies where a teacher can get a spine, so they don't have to do everything from an app store, but there's a spine there, but they can adapt it locally. They can pick this research material, this assessment rubric, this modality for this point, share their best practices with the community. I think ultimately that's where we're going to see emergent solutions that, again, are not just totally open, you have to put everything together. They have a thoughtful spine, a thoughtful structure, really good tools to adapt it to their local needs. Because we're in about 9,000 schools with our first two offerings, so we talk a lot to the teachers. We are always astounded by how the teachers are adapting and extending our products, because they're using it in amazing ways. And if you can build the community as a practice to systemize that, these emergent solutions, I think, will come along.
Yeah, and just one thing I want to throw out that I don't think people have been thinking about is a change in the way teachers learn about materials. It used to be you'd find out about it, a teacher might go to a conference once a year and might hear about materials, might hear about it from the other teachers in their school, or maybe they'll receive sales flyers or something, or see an ad in a magazine. We're entering a realm where teachers are going to be finding out about the best teaching tools through social media. So you imagine networks of science teachers or music teachers all sharing and tweeting and posting on Facebook and posting pictures about, wow, this really worked in my school. So I think that social media marketing, as we move into this new realm, is going to be an important way that the tools spread.
And do you think game developers themselves have done a good job of marketing themselves via social media?
I would say no.
Yeah. Chris?
I think that will be an influencer, but it's going to really enable the free and maybe the almost free. I think you really got to be thinking about commercial solutions to the entrenched oligopoly players in publishing and technology. And this is I said this last year at the same event. You have to be highly mindful of that and creative. I, as an investor, respond very favorably to creative thinking about looking at the establishment, understand how you can enable another player that might need assistance with something that's innovative. And again, it comes down to the dollars. If you're not addressing both the solution for the instructor and the learner, coupled with the dollars, you're going to have problems. And so I think being mindful of that at all times is where good solutions come from and get implemented and get commercialized and have an impact on kids' lives.
Go ahead.
We're at an interesting point with one of our products, a middle school product, where we have no sales or marketing people, so we've had to go bottoms up, disintermediation, the top-down supply chain, just because we don't have a sales force. But we tried to do that with rigor. We focused on mechanisms for teacher discoverability, of which social media is one, but there are actually many. Reducing friction for teacher adoption, early efficacy in the classroom, and then really teacher-to-teacher recommendation, because there is no stronger recommendation for a product than from another teacher. But we've tried to systemize that, and we've gotten some pretty good scale, and it's a freemium model. You can come in at free, and then there's tiers, and it's a service-based model. And we believe that's an effective model, and we have a very engaged teacher base because they selected it. We didn't even really think about that up front, but we realize now they selected it. But now we're in a position where we can do top-down sales, district sales, region sales, even country-level sales. But it's a very different thing because now a teacher is going to be asked to teach this, and they may not want to. And we're thinking hard about, okay, now we got to really think about the professional development, the ecosystem integration. There's a lot of things that are different when it comes as a top-down mechanism, and yet we need to do that to reach the scale and the opportunity. So, I mean, these are some of the subtleties in terms of go-to-market strategies, bottom-up, top-down, affiliate structures. All of that's, I believe, part of the mosaic that has to be in place to really get scale. Okay. Wow.
Somebody's clapping. Any questions? No? Oh, great, right there.
One thing you said, Alan, and also maybe you have a comment about it, Chris, but what are the services that you are envisioning and how would they relate to the commercial side?
You want to take that, Chris, or do you want me?
You can start.
So it's interesting. I mean, as we kind of see 4 different business models, if you will. And by the way, a business model can be a philanthropic, it can be a hybrid, or it can be a commercial. There's the licensing of the software. There's the purveying of a learning service where you're actually teaching or co-teaching a class. There's teacher professional development, and then there's sponsored, all of which are interesting. We believe in all 4, actually, and we are attempting to understand all 4. There are times when you can license the software, whether it's free or paid or freemium. There are times when we have found it most effective for actually us to do the learning service. But we can do that through partnerships. We can do that in a whole mosaic of ways. Teacher professional development, I mean, there's so many pain points right now. Lots of people are doing that, and it's a necessary part of the equation. Sponsorship is interesting in that often a third-party player, it could be a grant, it could be a local corporate sponsor. That's actually a vibrant, companies like Everfi are doing very well with that. So all of those are, I would say, within the cocktail of opportunity for somebody wanting to do this, and it really depends on their specific situation, which they want to prioritize.
I think that's a great white paper, the cocktail of opportunity.
Well, we are sponsored by Heineken, I noticed. So.
Were you going to add to that, Chris, or?
I think that's good.
Okay. I have a question for you, Constance. Where are we on the research related to game-based learning? What are the best studies? What kinds of issues are you looking at?
It's interesting because despite the fact that there's over a decade of research looking at games and games in controlled environments, games compared to other kinds of media, games compared to traditional pedagogical materials, there is not a single event that I do where someone has asked me, what's really the state of research on games and learning? So here I am to tell everyone that the state of research on games and learning is that games actually fare better than traditional materials, that studying games, I can get into the details of sort of which domains are faring better than others, but we have run into sort of this problem, kind of a misconception about games themselves, where talking about the effects of games is a little bit like talking about the effects of film or cars or television, where it's probably a little bit of the wrong unit of analysis. You can do a lot of really smart things with really stupid tools, and you can do a lot of really stupid things with really smart tools. There's the conclusion. Now that said, if you look at some of the meta-analyses that have come out in the last 3 years, what you find are some really interesting trends. So for developers and designers here, I would say that think about language learning. It turns out that even in games that are substantively about a different topic, let's say science, that you can show that students actually have large learning gains in academic vocabulary, which is totally crucial to academic literacy, which, by the way, is a strong correlate for things like IQ tests, gatekeeping tests like SAT, ACT, GRE, etc. So that's a really good boon. Lots of theoretical work predicted that, and the data bear that out. So language learning is a really big, hot area I would say is worth moving into. History learning, all the way to like physical ed, you see results across the board. Curiously, the 2 areas that you see more mixed results on are actually science and math, which is interesting because there's more funding for games in science and math than probably any other area. And they have also been, some of the earliest games released and games worked with were actually in science and mathematics. So I don't think that those 2 facts are are not related in certain ways.
Why do you think that's the case, though? Because when I think of science and math, I
Yeah.
think of the opportunity for game-based learning to be huge. I mean, just all the simulations and things like that. Why
Yeah.
is that?
Well, don't mistake the fact that the results are mixed for there are no results. I think what you may be seeing, and I'm not sure, none of the major meta-analyses actually tried to explain it very well. But I think what you may be looking at is that in the science curriculum, a lot of games are sort of focused on middle school and high school. So you have an incredible diversity of content that's getting covered in terms of what goes under the auspices of science and mathematics. So again, you have this problem of you're getting mixed results because you're mixing the kinds of games that we're talking about. And there's a couple caveats worth mentioning. The biggest one is that, well, two. One is that there are fewer studies that are looking at specific game mechanics rather than games themselves. So that makes it trickier to sort of tease out like what kind of mechanics are faring very well for particular content areas and what aren't, which is a little bit more reasonable. The second one is that, as I said before, you can do a lot of smart things with dumb materials and dumb things with smart materials.
Are those the only two choices?
I know. You can do a lot of mundane things with boring stuff, which probably is where I'm at a lot, probably at least in my admin work. But thinking about the game as it's implemented in a particular context and the talk that's happening around that game, so what is the activity that's in play around that game, is really crucial to looking at its effects, which makes studying it a little bit more difficult. Again, it's a bit like trying to say, what's the impact of computers in classrooms? Well, it kind of depends what kids are doing with computers in classrooms.
Yeah, and I know one thing I believe very strongly, that a thing that we as a community haven't taken seriously enough is the notion of the game as a tool for the teacher as opposed to the game as a replacement for the teacher. The ability for the teacher to use a game to create a teachable moment in the classroom, and then for the teacher to seize on that teachable moment and then impart it that way is when I've seen teachers use the right games masterfully, that's how they use it. But I don't think there is a widespread understanding that games can be used this way by teachers, and I don't think there's a widespread understanding that games can be used this way by students. But I guess I fully expect that 10 years from now, when we look back, it'll be one of the things that people look at it and say, "Wow, this is how these things really work best when you're talking about an in the classroom situation."
And how do you think there needs to be more professional development? Do you think ed schools need to put more time and resources into teaching those specific skills to future teachers?
It's a little bit of a chicken and an egg problem,
Yeah,
because
right.
it's hard to do this with just any game. Mm-hmm. If the game is designed to replace the teacher, it's hard for the teacher to wedge their way in. But if the game's designed to require the teacher and the teacher doesn't understand that, then there's no market for it. So that's a little bit of a problem. So I do think what we're going to start to see are some exemplars where people start to see that this works and how it works well. So I think it's going to need to be a number of things on a number of fronts before that philosophy has really comes across and makes a difference.
One of the things we're doing with ASU, the Center for Games and Impact is actually housed at the largest pre-service teachers college, the Mary Lou Fulton Teacher College. I think like 3,000 pre-service teachers. It's a fascinating terrarium. And work that we're doing partially with Intel is actually doing game-based teacher professional development and teacher training, because simulating multiple classrooms and having challenges connected to a peer network of other pre-service and in-service teachers, you can model things like, how do you run an effective inquiry or project-based class? How do you deal with the data? Like, one thing we hear back from teachers is they don't want endless data, because now we can create all this data. They want the right data to further their class. Like, so I do think even thinking how teacher training happens, because when you're a student teacher and you go into a class, you often see the same thing that's been happening for the last generation. You don't necessarily get to model a teacher who is actually navigating these very complex waters, but actually game-infused professional development can help with that. Can't solve it, but it can help with it.
I think it's worth also mentioning that it will be nice when we start shifting the conversation around parenting around games as well, because there's a huge rich market there, which really isn't the topic today, but that, if you look, well, let me tell a story. So when I first started studying games in like 2001, 2002, there really was no work on learning and cognition around games. So I went back and started looking at child development in TV. And if you look across those studies, you start seeing the same kind of pattern emerge. And that pattern is that it matters what's on the TV, but it actually matters more what conversation you're having on the couch about what's on that TV, right? So games are not some sort of unusually interesting medium in this way. It's just how media works. And what I find is that it's not merely teachers that are having a difficulty knowing what the right conversation and push points are around games, but also parents are as well.
I mean, I've noticed that it's sort of almost like a triangle. It's the parent, the teacher, and the student or child. You know, when that triangle is working, it's very effective. But when one of those is not, it seems to fall apart. So, yeah.
I think there's some questions up there.
Where do we have a question up top?
And I see one to the right.
Oh, great.
I can say something about that real quickly, because I work a bit with the Elizabeth Forward School, and I've been just absolutely amazed at at what they're able to pull off. And the answer is the administration makes it a priority. From the top, from the superintendent through the principals, all the way down, they believe that this is important, and so they make time for the teachers. They schedule the teachers time to be able to learn these new things. So often it's the case that a handful of teachers are very passionate about this, and that the school administration is somewhat ambivalent. I've often thought it has to do with the year 1965. Generally, people born after the year 1965 grew up with computer games, and people born before did not, and it's not familiar with them. As of this year, the average age of a high school principal means that they were born in 1965. So we're crossing this tipping point now where the administration is going to start to get it and start to respect it a bit. But it's tough.
You know what's interesting, and Michael Levine can speak to this. When the Cooney Center did a survey on teachers and games, there was a general assumption that the younger teachers, that the gaming generation would be the teachers that would embrace games, but it was often the more experienced teachers because they knew the importance of engaging their students. They had more experience in managing complex class situations. It was a very interesting finding that was very informative, and it reinforced this notion that we need these experienced master teachers to mentor the newer teachers who may come from a gaming psychographic, but they're just at sea in a chaotic classroom. And that was very, very instructive, that research for us.
I just got to also say, you know, we are not making it easy for teachers or parents yet, and we ought to. You know, I have 2 children. My husband and I are both game scholars. My kid right now is into Madden, and I'm just like, oh my God, do I actually have to learn Madden on top of everything else I've got to do in my life, right? I mean, and there's no quick primer, and maybe we should think about a design challenge that says, what if we could make it a little bit easier for parents and teachers to do this?
I mean, Minecraft is just the most astounding. I mean, it is the most remarkable educational platform I have ever seen. And I don't know if Joel Levin is here from Teacher Gaming with Minecraft EDU. We're working with him. I mean, a lot of things, making Minecraft education friendly has a lot of components to it. Classroom management, how you get it, how you license it, how you work on it, and then what is the right balance of curricular structures that keeps the joy of the open gameplay. But all of that's actually happening. Schools are getting interested, there's a demand for it, the product and service is getting better. So I'm kind of optimistic that this will emerge, but it's not a flip the bit, it's a process, a sustained process.
So for this audience, I'm curious, where do you see the greatest opportunities as far as the levels of education? Elementary, middle, high school, some combination of those. I mean, one thing I've noticed, because I mentioned that my daughter has used educational games, is her expectation now is that she will use those regularly. You know, and so as she moves up, into middle school, her expectation is that they'll have them, and she might not. But I think if you have a lot of kids coming up with that expectation, it's going to change things. So where are the greatest opportunities for these folks?
I definitely have some strong opinions about that. I think it's not one answer. I think there's a couple different fronts. I think middle school is one that is important because I think it's often recognized that things go wrong with kids in middle school. That is where kids often lose their way. And because of that perception, schools are eager to try something different. Let's see if we can do something better that will engage them more. So there's a passion to engage them at the middle school level. So I think that's one place that's a good inroad. On another level, the beginnings of school are an important time, and people are recognizing this sort of, pre-K through second grade as an important moment in time, but it can't happen there just yet. And it's all because of Steve Jobs. Because Steve Jobs had, one of the things he passionately believed was that the stylus was an evil tool. And he thought it should be done away with. Now what we see, we now have a generation of kids who have grown up with touch devices, and it's very intuitive and natural to them. And they expect that when they come to school, of course, I've done letter games at home and things, I'm going to do this in school, and it's not there. Because the schools see that and they say, this is a game system. Work is done with a pencil. It's great that you're playing these games with your finger. Now put that away, get out your pencil, it's time to work. So a small thing that I think is going to make a big difference is when we start to see widespread tablets with the built-in stylus, it's going to become acceptable in the K-2 space to be able to have games in the classroom. But until that technology platform is there, I think there's going to be some pushback.
Chris, have you seen any trends in that regard?
One very interesting area, just to kick it up a notch, that was born out of K-12 and games that provide a measurement of engagement, which led to better learning outcomes, is what's happening in the higher ed space. And we're seeing a lot of interesting business models that have game-based elements that tie to retention, and that's the biggest problem as you've had exponential growth in online programs, starting with the MOOCs to online programs of traditional universities to the for-profits programs. Predictive metrics and analytics around a student in trouble that's not going to be able to get through a course, let alone a program or degree, is a major problem for institutions, both from a financial standpoint because of solvency, and they need money, and the cost of college continues to go up, and they need to figure out ways to grow. But it also, to the question about bringing in time and efficiencies to the learner, being able to understand you've got a problem and the institution addressing that problem by red flags going up through interacting with a game that's reflecting your contextual grasp of the curriculum and the skills you're trying to learn, saves you time as a student because you're not going to learn it when you get an F at the end of the semester. It's going to happen progressively and incrementally. So that's a very exciting area that we're seeing a lot of interesting game-based, venture stage business plans and development coming out of, and an area we're really focused on.
Questions out there?
Oh, great. The question was what international opportunities there are out there.
I'm seeing amazing things come out of Scandinavia. There's a lot of very interesting companies coming from Norway and Sweden and Finland that are starting to commercialize in the States. One out of Norway, which is a CLMS company called It's Learning. It's really interesting. So I think there's a lot coming also from Asian countries in English language learning and in world language learning that are really fascinating. So those are a couple of spotlight
What about
areas.
going the other way, though? So U.S.-based companies finding opportunities in other countries.
Well, look at where we're performing on the PISA exam relative to other countries. I don't think there's a lot of people wanting to buy our math and STEM-based curriculum abroad, but
I'll tell
it's limited.
One huge opportunity that I see, a number of countries in South America, in Africa, have made huge countrywide investments to go one-to-one with a variety of devices. They are also looking at the types of skills and literacies that we're talking about, and they are actively looking for solutions. And that's why I say it's a demand problem, not a supply problem. They've put a huge infrastructure in base. They're ready to train teachers. The desire is there, and they're struggling to find solutions. A one-off game at that level, it's just not enough of a solution. And they know it's going to be a mosaic, and they're struggling. They're actually struggling. So I would say there's a huge opportunity of enabling environments for innovation to come in if they're properly tuned.
So, I was just going to say from a content perspective rather than a market perspective, so I've advised across national policy and foundations, and I can tell you a bit about where the hot spots are and where the missed opportunities are. So there's a lot of movement in middle school because the curriculum's a little bit more loosened up. You can do more in middle school than you can in other places. There's a lot of energy right now in very early literacy, so I'm talking 2, 3, 4. It's a really nice, like, sort of light app space for people to be in. Missed opportunities are things like we have these great crowdsourcing games that are coming out, and yet very few of them are thought of as learning opportunities for not just engaging people and sort of crowdsourcing their labor towards solving huge problems, which is awesome, but also thinking about what does that player get back. There's an event next week in DC that's on crowdsourcing games, which is the first of its kind, which I think will be really important. And I would make a plug, too, for thinking about domain areas like statistical reasoning, understanding probability. My God, games do this as a default, but we very rarely leverage or study what the outcomes there may be. And I would actually argue that's pretty much the bedrock for thinking about citizenship.
A question right there.
By Android.
What did he say?
By Android. I think it's. I think some of the most exciting things that I've seen in game-based grants have come from urban centers, and I think there's such a pent-up demand and hunger for solutions to help disenfranchised children learn and advance themselves, that games and the game-based learning community can be an advocate, a champion, and enabler of that, and will be more over time. I made a point of not wanting to call out any specific games that are addressing that, but I think there's a lot of interesting things, particularly in the pre-K through 3 around phonemic awareness and literacy advancement, literacy intervention that are really, really exciting, that are driven by games. Based learning.
And the price of hardware is obviously going to matter less and less over time. The schools don't need the most cutting-edge platform. They just need one with enough features. And with Moore's Law, the way it works, we're going to be getting to the point where the technology that you need costs less than one textbook. And so I guess I feel like that problem is going to take care of itself over time, and that potentially the technology may have more opportunity to make a difference in the schools that need help the most.
It can also, I think the affinity spaces around game-infused learning are critical so that kids can connect to folks that share their passion. There can be mentorship. There's a sense of social capital, and I'm part of a community. And I think that's something that technology and game-infused learning can do very well, and commercial games do that very well.
I also just have to make a catty comment. Catty's not the right word, but of all of the games and impact events that I go to, this is the one where people are also trying to tackle how can games be a catalyst in areas where we're looking at not the effects of inequity, but also some of the causes, and getting us to think through how is it that we end up with the haves and the haves not again and again and again. So I think that's another way to think about this problem. It doesn't solve our immediate one, but sometimes I feel like the conversation nationally around digital media is that it's somehow going to ameliorate poverty. And if you look at the studies, education has not done that so far. And I am a huge optimist, but I'm not convinced that digital media, games in particular, will do it on its own. So we may need to actually start asking some bigger questions there.
Right down the front row here. Or Dick.
Built on that, one critique of, say, the 19th century, 20th century public school system was that it was training kids to be industrial workers, to be factory workers. And so you had to have a very regimented system. So rest of us, the hollowing out of the middle class. Is this a world where we all become entrepreneurs, or the kids will be? What are we training them to do, or teaching them to do?
I would say that yes, that is the world that they are going to go into, is that everyone on some level, even if it's at some local level where you have to promote yourself within your narrow circle, you're going to need in some way to behave like an entrepreneur.
If you didn't read Tom Friedman's, I think it was yesterday, editorial where he talked about the chief hiring officer at Google, which just reinforces that. You know, it's rarely a degree they look for. They're looking for, you know, problem solvers, effective collaborators. We talk about engaged and purposeful learners. I mean, these are dispositions that aren't taught, they're cultivated, and they have to be cultivated and reinforced. I do think there's literacies. I mean, even literacies like digital fabrication. You see everything about 3D printing and making things. Those are going to become literacies that can be mentored over many years. So this combination of dispositions, literacies, and skills, as well as domain knowledge, you're going to need all of that to thrive in a very complex, rapidly changing 21st century.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Love this panel. Thank you so much. How would you respond to criticism of educational games that educational games are not necessarily terribly fun, or nobody wants to play them outside the classroom? And can a game be successful at education and also have mass appeal?
Hell's yes. Yeah, it's make better games. That's what it comes down to. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, making games at all that are fun is hard. That's just hard. And educating is hard. And now I'm going to do them both at the same time, right? It's like I'm going to juggle and ride a motorcycle. Like, you can do it, but it's really hard. But when it happens, oh my God, that's amazing. So, like, just be better. That's the answer.
And I think that is a perfect note to end on. Thank you. And give them a big hand. Thank you very much.